Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's celebrating women and diversity in technology event. And welcome to Harvard Extension School. This morning, we're gonna start our whole school year campaign on promoting and celebrating women and diversity in technology. But before we start our event this morning, what I'd like to do is to get our participant to participate in a poll so we wanted to get your input and see whether you can give us your feeling of whether you believe that we are making significant progress in closing gender gap in the tech industry. So I'm gonna give you a minute or so, and then I'm gonna show the result. Okay, all right. So I am ending the result, the poll, and I'm gonna see if I can share the result here. And you should be seeing it on the screen. The poll question is, historically, statistics shows a huge gender gap between men and women in the tech industry and other STEM fields. Do you believe that we are making significant progress in closing this gender gap in the tech industry in recent years? The choices are, yes, we have made significant progress, some progress, but not significant enough to close the gap. And finally, no, the status quo has not changed. And among the participants today, and we have 21% indicated that, yes, we have made significant progress. But 68% pointed out that we have made some progress, but not significant enough to close the gender gap in the tech industry. And 11% said no, the status quo has not changed. So if you take the 68% and plus the 11% of the some progress and no, and that is actually significant, is a huge, right, from this opinion poll, that the industry as a whole, while we have made some progress, but not anywhere enough. My name is Bruce Huang. I will be your host today for this event. I am the director for the master degree programs in information technology at Harvard Extension School. And I also teach data science as well. So the industry, right, and the tech industry is one of the industries been extremely blessed over the last couple decades. I guess in the history, in the human history, this is probably the fastest growing era, right, a period for technology. And we have seen technologies gone from the day not too long ago that we were basically using a computer that, you know, it takes 3 rooms just to hold. And that was probably 30 years ago. To today, we are holding this computer, that little tiny device, right, called the smartphone, and in our hand, that's nowhere close to the 3-room size of a computer. But yet, the power of that device is major. It's much more than that 3-room size computer. And the tech industry has been very profitable. And the tech industry has been basically growing at an exponential rate. To make that tech industry work, And to support that growth, labor workforce is extremely important. And it is a special labor workforce because in the tech industry, it requires a lot of the professional knowledge, and whether in computing or in engineering. But today, we have seen very small percentage, very, very small percentage of women and diversity graduating from STEM field, technology field, right? Especially computing field degree programs. And that was one of the things that I observed when I left the tech industry to become an academic. In the United States, right? And if you take a look at the overall workforce, we have half of the workforce are made up by women. But yet, in the tech industry, we are far lagging behind. Women's participation in the tech industry is only about 28%, while the overall workforce that make up by women is half, right? 47%, almost half. And then when you add another layer to it, the leaders, the women leaders in tech industry, that's even much smaller. It's only a third, like less than a third of the technology leaders are women. So we have lots of work to do in the tech industry. As an education institution, we believe that we have the responsibility to promote and celebrate women and diversity in technology. And therefore, that's why we are doing this program today. Today, we are absolutely honored, right? Absolutely honored to have one of our guest speakers for the day. And our guest speaker, Lynn Bollengier from L3Harris. Now, not long ago, and that I was looking through my LinkedIn profile. And for some reasons, and a picture popped up. And I saw a picture of Lynn, and who I know for some time. And she was like dressed up all in the military uniform. And it was a visit, I guess, from some of the senators to L3Harris, and Lynn was giving them a tour. And so when I saw that picture, I said, Lynn, yes, right? And that picture is really, I believe it's a strong message that women in technology, right? And so I have to get Lynn to be one of our speakers, and so that we can share with our community and beyond our audience her story, how she go from her humble beginning to where she is today. Now, when we talk about the small percentages of technology leaders in the industry, Lynn is one of them. And that Lynn is the president of the Integrated Vision Solutions sector at L3Harris Technologies. And one of the things that when I was telling my colleagues about what she does, and I say, remember seeing the picture of the Navy SEAL and they're all wearing that night vision goggle, right? I said, that's her product. And so everyone say, wow, okay, right, that is heavy tech. And well, we are absolutely honored to have Lynn. And Lynn, welcome to the show. And thank you so much for joining us to help us and to celebrate women and diversity in technology.
Thank you, Bruce. It's a real pleasure to be here and to engage with your community. I'm passionate about, kind of like a few things, and one of them is promoting women in technology. And so it's great to be here, and I look forward to the discussion and hopefully the questions to come from the audience.
Oh, wonderful. And so the president, right, and of a large division at L3Harris. And I'm pretty sure that our audience is interested in knowing what you really do, right, as the president of this large division at this large company. So can you share with us what you do and what a typical day is like, for you as the president of the Integrated Vision Solution Sector at L3Harris?
Sure. So my position closely mirrors what you would consider a general management position. So I'm responsible for 2 facilities, one here in Londonderry, New Hampshire, where we do system integration, test, design, and support of our night vision portfolio, as well as our laser aiming portfolio. You can think of us in the dismounted warfighter business, but with electro-optics as our core competency. And then I have another facility in Tempe, Arizona, where we build, it's essentially a foundry, where we build image intensifier tubes, which is a key sensor used in most night vision technology today. So a day in the life for me is helping my team, supporting my team to, make sure we're meeting customer needs, make sure we're meeting the commitments of the corporation. So I spend time with customers. I spend time with, my segment president and that leadership team, as well as the corporation and the corporate leadership team on like a quarterly basis. I meet with those folks. But our primary focus at L3Harris is really around customers and serving customers. So it's exciting. I actually just returned from a customer visit late last night, and it's very important that we stay close to those customers and make sure that our internal research and development funds and other resources are pointed in the same direction that our customers are going, what problems they're trying to solve. So general leadership position and, managing a great team here in Londonderry and Tempe, Arizona, and all that entails in terms of general management.
You did that well, but you did that really well. And so congratulations. Now, I mean, obviously that you did not start with that, right? And so if we go back, and so one of the goals, what we want to do is that we want to share the success stories and to inspire women and diversity and more participation in the tech field and more wanted to get into the field, right? So how did you get into the field? You were a mechanical engineering major back in college. Back in those days, today, in 2021, and we're talking about we're lacking of women and diversity participation in the tech field. But the day that when you started college, right, you make the decision to go with mechanical engineering, and there definitely is a minority in that field. So what motivated you? Why?
Yeah, that was way back when. You're right, Bruce. So I found in high school that I had a talent for science and mathematics. And I had some teachers in high school who really encouraged me to explore those talents and to push my limits and excel in those areas. And at that time, I knew of one engineer in my life. Mechanical engineer is a friend of the family, actually a patent attorney. And I talked with him a little bit about how he utilized his engineering background to do something as I think, different and unique as patent law. And it became clear to me through my discussions that engineering was a great foundational degree. You could get a job right away with 4 years of college. You didn't necessarily need an advanced degree. And I started to explore that and thought, well, I think I'll head into a major that, I can earn a good living in a 4-year degree. And then also something that played to my strengths, which were math and science. I will say my father encouraged me a lot, as did my mother. They're both extremely promoting of education and those sorts of things for myself and my brother. But I did grow up in a household where school and education came first, and it was my parents really who encouraged me to test myself and explore myself. When I graduated from UCSB in mechanical engineering, I was one of 2 women who graduated in that class. So we were definitely the minority in mechanical. And some of the other disciplines, chemical engineering and electrical engineering, there was a high representation at that time of women, but it was a different kind of place to be so far the minority in that class. But I did find classmates who are very welcoming, and I formed some great friendships during my time at UCSB.
Wow, that is a wonderful story, and that I really like when you said that. Okay, all right, the time I know the one mechanical engineer, and then talking to the patent attorney and so forth, right? And of course, the family and parents and encouragement, and those are important. And one of the things that we also realize that it's extremely important to have a mentor and to have people that you can actually look up to, and that the model after, right? And so this is one of the things that we're trying to do and trying to push, and providing that kind of mentorship and coaching, and therefore this type of programs that we are doing. It has been it's not a secret, right? And has been a known fact that that women because of their gender has been treated differently. You from time to time we hear some report and we hear some news in that regard, right? And so many women feel that because of their gender, and they are being treated differently, and that affected how they're being treated in their workplace, right? And from how people act and work with them, and to pay and so forth. Have you ever encountered those type of situations? And if you have, and do you have any advice to our audience on how to handle that situation?
Sure. I think earlier in my career, I maybe experienced some of the biases that you're talking about. And perhaps today I still do as well, but I'm maybe less attuned or listening to them, right? As I maybe was as a young engineer. I will say that finding advocates and mentors perhaps, but also folks who could be advocates for you, even early in the career, is important. And I would encourage the women listening here and that you're reaching out to not think that has to be a female mentor or a female advocate. There are a lot of male advocates and mentors out there. I had many early in my career I could think of, and they were a safe place to go and kind of work through, any issues that I had with respect to biases and so forth. I think early on, my strategy was to let my work speak for itself, but there were times that wasn't quite enough, and I needed to speak up about things that I didn't think were correct, or if I was being treated unfairly, look to, attack those things more head on with a discussion and openness. I know not everybody has the benefit of being in a very safe place to do that, but if you are, or you have an advocate or a mentor or someone that you can consider a trusted ally, I think that's a great place to go to, as a sounding board, and also for advice and advocacy and promoting a more equal kind of workplace. I do think things have changed, at least in my career. I've seen things change, a lot more sensitivity around diversity, not just for women, but for all minority people in the workplace. And I think that's helpful, right? Education about trying to, put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I've seen, more sensitivity, as I said, and consciousness around those kinds of biases. So I do think it's improving, but I do agree with the poll earlier. I think we've made some progress, but there's still more progress to be made. I work in defense, as you said at the beginning, and that's traditionally been a very male-dominated field as well. And at times there have been, in fact, yesterday at my customer meeting, I was the only woman in a room of about 15 people. And so it's still common to be maybe in that minority stake, but, to have the confidence to speak up, to know your material, to be confident in your abilities, your education, your experiences is, I think, what drives me to make sure that I'm contributing and not kind of shrinking into the background. So I don't notice it as much anymore, but early in my career, I think working through advocates and folks like that was a way to overcome some of the biases that I found in the workplace.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for sharing and the advice given to our audience. That now, obviously, that you handle it really well, and you have a remarkable career, and it's very successful. And what has been the driving force, right? And what has been the driving force to get you to where you are today?
Well, I've spent most of my career in defense, and I took a 4-year kind of hiatus in commercial and just found it wasn't right for me. So having a lot of purpose is what drives me personally. Everyone has their own driving force, I think, but for me, the purpose and what I'm doing, especially after I had my daughter, was, if I'm going to leave her in the care of others to go do a career, what is it that's going to be truly meaningful? And I feel like making a difference. And the contribution I make to the defense industry feels very meaningful to me. I think that's been a driving force. I've always been curious about technology, curious about problem solving, and those are two key ingredients to a career in technology. And really working with our customers closely and trying to solve their problems is something that is extremely motivating to me. So I try and inject, even in my general management role, try and inject as much of that as possible, to kind of build up my reserves of energy and so forth. I think my career in some ways early on just progressed just due to, kind of keeping my head down and doing work. But the more I moved up in organizations, it became clear to me that networking and, getting that hand up and that advocacy and that help from different parts of the organizations was a key ingredient to being considered for, management training programs and mentorships, as you talk about, and then also those opportunities to bid on, higher level positions. So I think for me, though, the core of it is really about the purpose that we have at L3Harris. And to me, servicing our men and women in uniform is something that is really meaningful and personal to me. So that's what drives me. That's what gets me up in the morning to work hard every day. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. It's really been an anchor for me throughout my career.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And it's absolutely wonderful that when you're doing something that you enjoy and then you're making contributions and let me turn the table around, right? Let me turn the table around. And so far we talk a lot about you, Lynn, and how you go from your humble beginning to where you are today. And well, you made it. you are one of the leaders. Well, you're one of the tech leaders, right? In a large firm. And so let me turn the table around. That as an executive in this large firm, right? I mean, what advice you have? What is your view? How the tech companies, right, especially large tech companies, and what do they need to do? Not just in terms of increasing diversity and women in the workforce, right? But how can they? What should they do? How can they promote and nurture and expand women leadership in tech firms such as L3Harris?
Yeah, I kind of see that as two different questions. So one is, how do we grow the pipeline of women in technology so that we have a great pipeline to pick from when it's time to pick leadership roles? And I think a lot of research, and this won't be any news probably to your audience or yourself, but early intervention, like I talked about my story, really learning in high school that was an option for me, that it wasn't embarrassing to, be getting good grades in calculus and things like that was helpful to me and encouraging me to explore the opportunities in technology or engineering in my case. So I think early intervention to drive the pipeline. And then I will say, for example, at L3Harris, we made public our diversity and inclusion report for the first time in 2020. We've made commitments, and a lot of corporations are doing that, setting targets for themselves and creating programs around promoting diverse workforce. It's really growing that pipeline all the way up from college and university level, even before that high school. So we get a college and university population that we can then slate into positions of hierarchy within the corporation. One of the things I think has helped move the needle, at least in my business within L3Harris, is making sure that our slates are diverse, and we're very committed to doing that. So I think companies can make commitments that way where we make sure that we've got a pipeline of people to select from that is more representative of our population in general. And I think through that we'll see more women leaders, more women in technology, et cetera. So we have some lofty goals at L3Harris about being 50-50 worldwide, women versus men in the workforce. And we have some work to do there where I think it's about 24% overall, but we have about 30% of women in executive roles at L3Harris. And I think other companies are doing things like that. Our college graduate, recruiting is even stronger. It's almost a third. So I think those activities of creating pipelines is really important. I think for companies to make an inclusive environment for women to succeed is part of that empathetic learning of what it's like to be a woman in the workplace. Not to draw too many generalizations, but I think you could say that more women than men are the caregivers in their families. So how do we create opportunities for work-life balance so that women can fulfill those roles at home, whether that's with children or with parents, and still be considered and successful in their roles within the company. And I think maybe that's one thing the pandemic has taught us more than anything, that this flexibility of working from home and flexing your hours and things like that, as people have been managing through a very difficult time with the pandemic, we can learn from that. But I see more opportunities for women in that regard, where we can balance things out a little bit better. At least that's been my personal experience in that. So I think creating that pipeline all the way from high school up through universities is very important. And then to my mind, very intentional efforts around educating people about what it's like to be a woman in the workplace, so we create a welcoming environment, and then creating those diverse slates are some key things that we can do to help continue to promote women into higher level positions within the tech field and other businesses.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for what you do in promoting and nurturing women and minorities in the tech industry, right? I mean, I'm really glad and I'm delighted to hear the commitment that L3Harris made, and in terms of increasing the pipeline and women and minority in the participation in the tech field, and also encouraging and nurturing the women leadership. And you share some wonderful numbers, and that I hope that the industry as a whole, and if we have more corporations and more companies that focus on that, and it will be a different world, right? And 5 years down the road and so forth. So one of the things that you mentioned is that you mentioned work-life balance, right? Work-life balance, and a lot of our women colleagues, right, and a lot of our women colleagues in the industry, basically that seems like a problem that they often have to deal with, right? Especially the women that with family and kids and children and so forth, and a lot of them are concerned that whether that's an inhibitor for them to make progress and so forth, right? In the workplace. So what advice you have for women and minorities, especially women, right, in that kind of situations, and that how can they make progress? How they progress in the tech industry?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think everybody's situation is quite different. I mean, I'm comfortable to share that I'm a single mother, and so I was divorced when my daughter was just 4. And I found, for me personally, having to overcome that, that barrier of asking for help, right? Because I couldn't do it on my own, and I needed support from friends and family and things like that. And I was very fortunate to be able to put together a network of people who could help make me successful, so I could still travel, so I could still do the business dinners and things like that. I think, you know, work-life balance means different things to different people. Some people, you know, I find I enjoy my work a lot. I spend a lot of time working, but especially when my daughter was small, I created some kind of sacred hours where I would come home from work and spend time with her before she went to bed. And then if I needed to, I would kind of get back after work and things like that as a way to kind of manage my workload. But everybody needs to find their own balance there. But I will say, again, not to generalize too much, but I do think women, at least the women I know, have trouble asking for help. And I would just say, you know, you don't have to do it alone. You know, create your network of people, and don't be afraid to ask someone, hey, could you run and do that child pickup? Could you stay home and help me manage, you know, my elderly mother who's living with us, or something like that, so that I can do these things. You'd be surprised. I was surprised, certainly, when I opened up my aperture to the idea that there were people and friends and family who were very willing to help. It wasn't a burden at all, who were just willing to support. And I think taking advantage of those kind of opportunities is great. I think for me, balancing things out means, you know, making sure I have purpose outside of my work as well. And so I do some volunteerism with my church and other things. And so I think finding that connection where it doesn't feel like it's all or nothing with work, or, you know, you're on or you're off, but that there is a collection of things that drive you and give you a lot of satisfaction is important. But do not be afraid to ask for help or ask for an accommodation. How about we move that meeting to earlier? How about we have that call a little later, and things like that, and just ask for those things. I think really opened up a lot of opportunity for me to balance things out with work and family.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that advice, and that is very helpful. I agree that a lot of time that a lot of our women colleagues and basically that afraid to ask for help, and that because the assumption is that hey. I'm gonna have the choice, right? Is it career or family, or but you can have both, and that I think that is our responsibility to make sure that you know, as a corporations and as organizations, and helping our colleagues, and to be able to do both, right? And so now you have a big job, and you have a huge job, L3Harris, and so what is your biggest stress reliever?
Yeah, I wish I could say exercise or something really healthy like that, but instead I'll say, to be honest, I enjoy reading. That's a way. I'm an introvert. Maybe many of your technology folks and engineers on the line here are also introverts. So I recharge my batteries a little bit by taking some alone time. So I enjoy reading. I enjoy, you know, walking with friends and things like that. And I have a routine on the weekends of connecting with the people who are important to me. So my folks live out west. I'm here in the Northeast. My folks live out west. My best friend lives out in California as well. And so I make time to connect with them over the phone, whether that's FaceTime or a call. And that's another way that I think helps me kind of manage my stress. I should be exercising more. I wish I could say that was my major stress relief, but walking the dog with some friends is probably about as hefty of exercise as I do these days.
Okay, all right. So I mean, I'm the same, and I keep telling me that myself that I need to do more exercise, and so I took the same route, walking the dogs, right? So yes, it was wonderful, and thank you for sharing that. And so what is the most exciting part working for L3Harris?
I really love working so closely with our customers. As I said, we put equipment on a person. So you talked about night vision goggles, but we also make sighting devices for weapons and things like that. And I really, really enjoy connecting with customers, hearing what they like, what gaps that they have in their technology needs, and working with them to derive creative solutions. And for me, that's the most exciting part of the job. It's a bit unique in my business. Our platform is a human being, not an aircraft or something. So we get to have a dialogue with our end users. And to me, that is absolutely the most exciting part. And then to see our equipment in use overseas, or, hear about stories from folks, this device saved my life. I wouldn't have seen this, threat if not for your equipment. And to me, that's really exciting and fulfilling. So I really love our customers. I think they're wonderful people, and I really enjoy the connection with them.
Wonderful, excellent. Thank you so much. And now what I'd like to do now is that actually turn it over to my colleague, right? And what we wanted to open up for the audience to basically ask some questions, right? And we have Jill Felicio, and Jill is our director for the Office of Advancement and Development and also Alumni Associations. And that Jill is actually homegrown, and she graduated from here, and then she continued to work here. And so Jill will be helping us to basically monitor that Q&A.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Lynn, thank you so much for sharing so much of your perspective on how you managed to do it all. We've had some great questions. If you could elaborate maybe just a little bit more on, I think, a phrase I will be borrowing forever, which is opening up your aperture. I love that. I mean, I think it's so interesting to imagine and envision bigger, and the pandemic, as you referenced to, is a way to do that, and thinking about the world changing and the effect on the workforce. I mean, I hope that this flexibility and this increased, desire to expand all of our benefits in working and to manage children and family and elders and other obligations, as opening the window to vision. So can you talk about the way that you imagined your trajectory? And there's a great question that asks, about escalating within a position and moving up. And often here at Harvard Extension School, we enable someone to come back and reskill and relearn and change careers entirely. And to make that move, from a middle manager to senior manager, CEO. Can you talk about how you managed, to climb that ladder so specifically? Did you have a vision for that when you were younger?
I don't know that I had a vision for that when I was a lot younger. I will say that I reached a point in my career where I had been an engineering leader for a long time, many years, and I was craving a bit of a new challenge, but I really love the business that I'm connected to. And as I said, the customers and the technology and so forth. And so I did, maybe like some of your participants here, attendees on the call, went back to school to educate myself. And I got my MBA later in life. I attended an executive MBA program, and that really helped me get some perspective on, different aspects of the business world beyond engineering. So I really enjoyed my operations classes. I really enjoyed my strategy classes, and it helped me think about how my career might change. And out of that, and through, some discussions and discovery within the company, I set a goal for myself to be a general manager, which I was for 2 years before I took on this role as sector president. And I think the education helped me, but also I will say part of moving up in your career is to let people know what you want to do. So you need to voice your opinion of where it is that you want to take your career. You can't be passive in it. You have to take an active role in what it is that you want to do. And I'm not saying, storm the HR office or your boss's office and beat down the door, but when the times arise during one-on-one discussions, during annual performance reviews and so forth, state what your objectives are. This is where I'd like to go. What gaps do you see, in my experience or in my education or tool set? How do I need to close those gaps, and to really think about an active and a way to kind of take control to steer it. And the first time I went out for a general management role, I wasn't successful, but I registered my interest. I interviewed with people. I took the meetings. And I think, enough people learned what I was interested in that people started to help me fill in the gaps. A little assignment here to learn more about finance, a little assignment here to learn more about business development. And through that way, I was able to, I think, round out my experience and my resume, so to speak, so that I was prepared for the next time that I went forward and an opportunity presented itself. So, I think that was a key learning for me, that you can't just sit back and expect people to select you right out of a pool. You really have to say, this is what I want, or this is what I think I want. And I think most companies would be, I know certainly as a manager myself, I love hearing what my employees want to do. So as assignments or opportunities come up, we can stretch people and see how they like it, and make sure before we make a big move decision, and also that people feel comfortable that they can move within the company. I think is part of an advantage of being part of a larger organization like I am. But I would say you really have to take control of it, and you really have to voice what it is that you want, and be willing to say that. And maybe make yourself vulnerable, right? Somebody might say, oh, I don't know if I see you in that position. Well, why not? What gaps do you think I have? How can I fill those things in so that I can be considered for a position like that? I think having that dialogue and making sure people know what you want is very important.
That's great. I mean, I love that, building your toolkit, rounding out your resume. It's interesting that we see a trend toward adding soft skill development in many of our technical fields. That seems to be really booming these days. So that's great to hear. And, it's interesting. You talk about advocacy and that, that importance of raising your hand and making your interest known. Can you dive in a little bit deeper on what that was like as an extrovert? Is there the relationship feedback you get from customers? We got a great question related to feedback and input, and using that, to build that sounding board and that extrovert behavior. How did you approach that in your introvert way?
Yeah, I think any gap, the way that I view it is any gap, whether it's leadership or otherwise, you can focus on the negative, right, of this white space or this gap that you have, but don't forget that you have a set of strengths that you can build on. So for me, thinking about the strengths that I have, which I think are really understanding my customers, I think I'm a pretty good communicator, those things you layer on top of each other. And so, well, how can I use the strengths that I have to go and close gaps? And so for me, yes, being an introvert and not really getting my energy from, let's say, a cocktail party, but I really love talking to customers about technology. So how can I use that to, exercise those muscles of being able to maybe do a panel like this or other things that come up like in an executive position? I think it's important to not, yes, we have to understand our gaps, but remember, you always have strengths that you can build upon. And whether you learn about those through your discussions with your manager, through peers, through, don't forget your diagonals, maybe not your direct manager, but a manager, a peer of your manager or something like that, you can often get a lot of feedback. People will, I think, respond well to that and offer that up if you ask the question, what would you say my biggest strength is? What would you say the area that I can most improve upon? And to have a mindset about where you want to head and then use those strengths as building blocks, I think is very important. I think, again, not to generalize too much, but I think myself, like others, can kind of women, maybe we tend to focus on what we don't have, right? There's a lot of statistics about women not applying for jobs unless they meet every single requirement and these sorts of things. I think there's some very good data to support that attitude. And instead of focusing on the gaps that we have, like, what can we do to use our strengths as springboards or platforms to close those gaps? So for me, maybe I'm not super in finance, at least at the time, right? But I had this great engineering and technology and problem solving skill set. So how can I use my problem solving skill set? How can I use what I understand about the customers to close in on that gap? And who do I need to partner with, right? Great CFO, other people who can mentor me and how the corporate finance piece works was a way that I closed that gap so that I could take on a general management position and then move up into this one. So I think, don't forget about your strengths and maybe flip the narrative a little bit. How can you use your strengths to close your gaps? That would be my advice and maybe a more positive way to look at it.
fabulous advice. I love that. I feel like people are sometimes, I guess, a little psyched out by feeling like they don't have every skill. And because they don't have every one, they feel like they're not a good candidate. And maybe it's part of our education system, I think, accepting students that are good in everything. Whereas the European education system tends to focus on your avenues of strength. When you're in high school, say, they pick a very narrow avenue to build on and build those strengths. So it's really, really great. I love you're talking about relationships, and relationships being at the heart of what motivates you and what helped you excel. There's a really great reflection in a question from a former high school teacher who really appreciates your reflecting on the importance of mentorship in secondary education, and asks, who was your mentor and what actions do you feel promoted empowerment in STEM in particular? Do you have that one key mentor? You mentioned a few. Is there one that was particularly meaningful?
I can't recall that there was a specific person. For me, it's been a collection of people. So my high school math teacher, Mrs. Baker, who I will always remember, she was the one who took me aside and said, I see how you're doing in class. I think you really have a talent here. What have you thought about career-wise? I think I was a junior in high school at the time. And so her thought process and reaching out and taking that moment to help highlight something for me or acknowledge, I think, something I knew but maybe didn't understand was perhaps unique or worth further exploration, was really helpful to me. So I'll always remember Mrs. Baker at Hart High School, and she was an important part of progressing my thought process around engineering and so forth. I've had mentors all along the way, and advocates and other, support systems. I was an intern before I graduated from college with my engineering degree. And, that first manager, maybe it's something about going in as an intern where you're still calling people Mr. and Mrs. and things like that instead of by their first names, in the workplace. That kind of endeared me to him, but he was very helpful early on in my career. And then just kind of along the way, I think there's a kind of a new mentor or a new advocacy and a new group of people at different phases of the career. So it has been a collection of people, but early on, it was definitely my high school math teacher.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say.
That's right.
Now, Susan asked a great follow-up question to that. Are there professional organizations other than, your specific industry, perhaps, that you'd recommend being a member as a women in tech or to support women in tech?
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of local groups. I tend to focus maybe in more local organizations, but I think Society of Women Engineers was really helpful for me, especially early in my career. I think there are a lot of them. IEEE has a great women and diversity program. They put on a women's conference every year. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. I think, you have to find the organization that feels right for kind of your approach. I think with Society of Women Engineers, they focus a lot on early intervention of women in high school and so forth, which I think is, as I said earlier, I think is very important. So that's an organization that kind of runs to my thinking. But there are lots of women in technology or women in engineering kind of organizations, I think, to choose from.
Great, thank you. And to encourage the next Mrs. Bakers, right? What more can we do to help develop STEM educators, to turn those students into teachers? Do you have any thoughts on that? Rebecca asked that great question. How do we get a more diverse population to pursue STEM fields and to teach?
I don't think I have a great answer on the teaching piece. I mean, I've found that organizations who go into, high school, junior high, even, primary schools and some organizations, to show the range of possibilities of what a technology or an engineering degree can do is helpful. So for me, I'm not designing products today, right? But I work for a technology company, and that engineering foundation I have is something that I could parlay into this general management role, right? We talked earlier, I talked about the patent attorney who I knew who took his engineering degree and moved that into law. really technology, whether it's science or engineering, has a tremendous value overall in the workplace. Even if you're not specifically doing design, development kinds of work, it's the problem solving skills, it's the data-driven discernment around decisions and things like that, that I think we learn as scientists and engineers in the education system, that become these great platforms or bases on which we can have careers in multiple different directions. So maybe, one of the things that we could do is promote better the diversity of opportunity that comes from a technology degree and the study of science and engineering. Even if you don't aspire to be at your computer coding all day, writing software all day, or for my brethren, right, working on a CAD station all day, which I honestly found, within the first 5 or so years of my career, I don't know, sitting in front of a CAD station all day was really feeling great to me, right? I kind of got out of the office. I did more manufacturing, engineering, more engagement with customers, right? And built my career that way. So there's a lot of opportunity. I would say, what we can do to promote those ideas where you don't have to necessarily be a designer or an engineer forever, but they're great foundational degrees that we can move into a variety of different positions is important, key to that.
That's great. I mean, we really couldn't agree more here. Harvard Extension School and the Division of Continuing Education generally is trying to help students move from that mindset of, my career of a lifetime to a lifetime of careers, and imagining the possibilities that exist. And that requires, adaptability and resilience and positioning, right? So there's a great question related to authentic leadership. Now, kind of drawing into your being open and advocating and honesty, is there that gender balance where you feel you need to assert more because you're in a male-dominated field? Or how do you develop that authentic voice while also, advocating so hard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, authentic leadership is really important to me. At times when I've tried to, overly mold myself to fit in a way, it doesn't feel right to me. So, I mean, again, everybody has to choose their own path. I work with an executive coach, and she has a great metaphor for this idea of on your cell phone, you have the volume up and down buttons, right? You can move things one click up or one click down, maybe, and how you dial up your how aggressive maybe you are, or strong you are, and how you speak, but you don't want to go too far afield from what your own personal core is. And so for me, that's something I think about. We can adjust up or down a little bit, but there's probably a core that we all feel comfortable in, and to push yourself to be something that you're not, I wouldn't advocate for that. I don't think that hasn't been a recipe for success for me. And I wouldn't advocate that other people do. I do think we need cooperation from workplaces to be an inclusive environment where we feel like we can be our authentic selves every day at work. But for me, that's a really important tenet. If I was forced to become something that doesn't feel right to me, I don't think I could stay right at an organization. I mean, lucky for me, I don't feel that way at L3Harris. I feel very supported in kind of my perspective on things. So I would just say authenticity is very important, and we can always improve, right? Move that needle up or down and adjust based on the situation. But I wouldn't recommend that people go too far afield from what feels right for them. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. It's a nuanced conversation. It's difficult at times to be that lone, say, female voice in a male-dominated room, but you do it beautifully. And you have such a wonderful, deep perspective that you've shared, and such intimacy that, I know our participants really appreciate. Now we're getting on in the hour. So I wanted to say to Bruce, if you would like to pop on and share final thoughts, and then Lynn, you can share some as well. Be great.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you so much, and thanks, Jill, for facilitating that Q&A. thanks our audience for those wonderful, wonderful questions. And definitely thank you, Lynn, and for your time and for sharing your personal story and sharing those advices to our audience. And diversity and women in technology, right? And is the campaign that we launched today, and that we're gonna be basically that having event, and we're gonna be promoting that campaign and throughout the year. And it is an important topic, and if you look at it, that everything that we do involves technology. And that doesn't matter what industry you're in now, that whether you're working in retail or you're working in some administrative office work, or you're working in the high-tech industry, from library and to restaurants, and anywhere you go, you're going to have to deal with technology. Even the simplest job, right? And it involves technology, and this is an important topic, and so I appreciate the audience and joining us as we take on promoting women and diversity in technology. Lynn, what's the final word of advice and encouragement you have for our audience?
Yeah, I think one thing I didn't get to talk about, which I think is very important, is I think there's often a misconception that there's only a place at the table for one or two women, right? Whether that's an executive role or an engineering team or something like that. And I think sometimes that can create unintended friction amongst women, actually thinking that they're competing for these limited number of slots. I would just say that I don't believe that's true. And I think that's a really dangerous narrative to have in your head. I think we all need to support each other. So I think, myself, everybody on the call, we all have an obligation, and we should all make a commitment to support other women in technology as they're coming up the ranks or up here, or anyone who maybe needs a hand, somebody maybe who isn't even asking for help, and to offer it, right? I think that's another way we can create a community and a space. So we shouldn't feel like we're competing for a limited number of roles. We should feel like we're all working together to create more parity in the workplace, and we should be helping one another, helping folks up. But Bruce, thank you so much. Jill, thank you for having me. This has been a real pleasure. I really appreciate the audience for tuning in, perhaps early for some of your time zones as well, and for your really insightful questions. It's been a real pleasure to talk with both of you, and I admire so much your commitment to this program over the course of the next year. So good luck with the rest of your speakers and your program. It was a real honor to be here.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lynn. And so absolutely an honor for us to have you helping us to kick this event and kick off this important campaign, right? And so for the audience, that we continue to have two more fireside chats today. One will be at 1 p.m. and the other one will be 3 p.m. We'll be talking to others, influential leaders in the industry. And one of the things that Lynn mentioned is very important, right? And I think this is a call to action, that not only call to action for the companies and the enterprises and the organizations, and to make commitment in terms of promoting, nurturing more women and diversity in the industry. But it also starts from ourselves, right? And starts from you. And as you becoming that leader, as you becoming that women and diversity in technology, don't forget, we have the responsibility and to make sure that we nurture and expand and continue to nurture and expand women and diversity in technology. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning, and we will see you at 1 p.m. Goodbye.